When Keir Starmer spoke to the nation on Thursday about far-right protesters, he was right to use that term, far-right protesters. In Southport and Hartlepool, we saw thugs intimidate worshippers at mosques purely because they are Muslim. In London, we've seen protesters mobilised by far-right leaders like Tommy Robinson, who's recently had to flee the country to escape prosecution for contempt of court. But Britain's right-wing media are furious that Starmer dared to use such a term. This was Mike Graham and Isabel Oakeshott speaking on the Murdoch-owned TalkTV.
Just want to get your view on Keir Starmer's little speech yesterday. I couldn't believe that he had the opportunity to speak to the nation and kind of make out that he understood what the problems were in our nation, and many of which you've highlighted over recent days. But he didn't. All he did was he kind of made it very clear that he's kind of tone deaf about what's going on out there.
I couldn't agree with you more. He fell right into the trap, didn't he? I mean, the words that he said in that statement showed an angry nation that he just doesn't get it. The idea that the eruption of fury that has been witnessed across this country in the last few weeks on all sorts of issues is just some kind of far-right outrage is so utterly misconceived that I've been left wondering how he's got to the level of Prime Minister with such weak political antennae.
I mean, with all due respect, he's come to the position of Prime Minister because he just got voted in by the British electorate, right? Not by an overwhelming proportion of that electorate, but by a big proportion of that electorate, and a much bigger proportion of the electorate than the Brexit Party, which is sort of the director of it. I suppose it's not led anymore, is Isabel Oakeshott's partner, right? So if we're talking about what the country really thinks, who has more right to suggest that? Isabel Oakeshott or Keir Starmer? I'd say at the moment it's Keir Starmer. Also, the number of people we're seeing on the streets, the idea that this is really representative, the country is furious. The vast majority of the country are looking at these protests organised by the likes of Tommy Robinson, drunk, coked up, throwing bricks at the cops and saying, I want nothing to do with these people. The idea that these are representative of sort of a broader sort of majoritarian or large-scale movement in this country, I think is nonsense. Also on TalkTV, host and former Brexit Party MEP Alex Phillips had this exchange with a former police detective.
A friend just messaged me before and he said, does far right simply mean white? So if any protests occur with white people, does it just simply mean that they're all far right? And straight away they're dismissed. Their views are dismissed without any debate.
I'm glad you said that, Mike, but I actually think there's something else in this. I think far right now means working class.
So according to Alex Phillips, these protesters only get called far right because they're working class. So does she think this scene is representative of working class Britain?
Turn in. Oh! Fucking hell, I caught that. Fucking hell, as if I caught that. Screen recorder.
If you're listening to the podcast, that was a man in Hartlepool punching an Asian man simply for walking towards him and a group of other thugs. And we might also ask if Alex Phillips thinks this scene is representative of working class Britain. Now, I'd say if that's what you think of when you think of working class people, or indeed white people, it might be you who's guilty of the prejudice here. And for a more positive and I think more accurate representation of what working class Britain is actually about, I'd recommend Alex Phillips considers Tony Hill. He was filmed this week rebuilding a wall at a mosque in Southport that was pushed down by the people Phillips is venerating.
What made you want to come out here today in this baking hot sun?
Well, the thing is, you see it on the news and it doesn't make any sense. You've got a vigil down the road and then you've got this going on.
Yeah.
These have done nothing wrong, so, we spoke to the company we work for and they were coming down, so we just joined them. So, and then, just try and get it done before someone makes a mess again. No one deserved it, did they?
Yeah, do you have a message for people who did tear this apart?
Oh, get your facts right first before you start doing stuff. No one else knows, do they? Facebook's a dangerous thing, isn't it? If you're not looking at it right, if you just want an agenda, make sure you get it right first, to be honest.
Well, I really, I mean, that video went absolutely viral because the guy is just so, likable, inspirational. Aaron, I think, these right-wing pundits who are sort of siding with the protesters and saying this is real Britain, I think they're taking a real risk here, because I think lots of people, even right-wing people listening to them, will feel like, what, do you think those people on the streets are what we're about? Because I am fairly confident, I haven't seen any polling on this, but I'm fairly confident that the vast, vast majority of people of this country look at the people who've been out on the streets in Southport and Hartlepool and Downing Street this week and think, I want absolutely nothing to do with those people.
We have tools by which we can understand mass sentiment. And the most easily available one to anyone is, of course, Google search trends. Now, if you look at search trends from the last several days, almost all of it pertains to the Olympics. So you've got Wednesday, July the 31st, number one, Alex Yee. Number two, Fred Sirius, of course. Congratulations, Fred. His daughter came third in the Olympics diving, synchronized diving. Ismail Hania, the Hugh Edwards story. People have interest in 101 things. Just as many people, more people, in fact, are thinking about the interest rate cut announced by the Bank of England yesterday, the first interest rate cut in 4 years. That will be really important news to lots of people, because they'll think, okay, well, when I remortgage, it may mean that actually things won't be as bad as I thought. Or if you're trying to get a mortgage, you're thinking, wow, well, next month, the month after that, will be better than 2-3 months ago, or even right now. So this idea that this particular event, this particular scene captures, the whole of the white working class is just pure and utter idiocy. And as you've said, Michael, we don't even need to think about polls and data or even Google Trends. We had a literal general election campaign very recently, which told us how politically active or politically involved people over the age of 18 feel and think about politics. Now, on the one hand, only 1 in 5 eligible voters voted for Labour. That's true. We had relatively low turnout, and Labour have the lowest number of votes for a majority, let alone a majority of more than 170. Absolutely true. However, Labour did come first. The Conservative Party did get, I think, mid-20s. Even if you put the Conservative Party and Reform together, they got significantly fewer votes than the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, and Labour. If you're talking about these as voter blocks, significantly fewer. Much fewer. If we had PR, they would be nowhere near power. They wouldn't be able to get power if we had a purely proportional electoral system. So it's stupid. It's dumb. I think, as well, with regards to Isabel Oakeshott and Richard Tice, there was that photo that was shared by Isabel Oakeshott of a pretty standard back street, I think in Yorkshire, and she was saying, how awful this is, and that's what terrace housing in that part of the world has looked like for a really long time. And yes, it should be better. We shouldn't have gaps in roads, and people should have a bit more money in their back pocket to be able to maybe look after their houses a bit better. We shouldn't have HMOs being built into 2 up, 2 downs, because that often deteriorates the standard of the whole street, etc. Of course, all of those things are bad, and those are about how do we wish to build our economy and how much do we want to give working people in their back pocket. That's why, for instance, I support things like pay rise for public sector workers. So there is this real disconnect between people like Isabel Oakeshott and I think much of the public. And I would add one more variable to all of this, which you didn't mention, Michael. We sort of hinted at it already with Twitter, which has just clearly become this machine for. And I'm honestly not pulling my punches, but I'm also trying to be sensitive with the language I use here. This has clearly become a machine for compulsive, obsessive thinking, and I think very soft forms of mental illness for lots of people on the right. I honestly believe this, because there's just this compulsive, vindictive anger constantly, every day, and it can never be satiated since Elon Musk bought it. X/Twitter has always been prone to quite negative mental health consequence externalities, but I think it's just gone off a cliff now. And so people like Isabel Oakeshott, they look at their Twitter feed and they think that's where everybody is at, but it's not where everybody's at. If you're a teacher, if you're a junior doctor, if you're anybody really in the public sector, and I've spoken to a number of people about this, police officers, nurses who already had a pay rise. I've spoken to a number of people about this, teachers. they are expecting a better deal on pay over the next 5 years than the last 5 years. That's because it's a Labour government. Even people that don't normally vote Labour, I've spoken to a police officer, for instance, who doesn't normally vote Labour, voted Labour, have said this to me. They're expecting a better 5 years with regards to their pay than the last 5 years. So they're actually a little bit more optimistic. Okay, if people were so excited about the Tories and about the right, they would have gone and voted for them. And to underscore my point around Twitter or X, there are lots of accounts on the right, and I've quote tweeted some of them. If you want to look at my feed over the last few days, you can see some instances of this. And they're saying, I don't think Labour makes Christmas. How things have fallen off a cliff since Labour came into power. Well, firstly, the average vote, the average punter is going to give Labour time. Secondly, I wouldn't be that surprised if in the second half of this year, particularly in Q4, the final 3 months of the year, we actually see a bit of an economic boom because you've got these new public pay deals coming in into gear, particularly with junior doctors, but we'll see other ones too. Clearly, Rachel Reeves is going to give pay rises to public sector workers. That's already obvious from the first month of this government. They will generally meet the recommendations of pay boards. And we've also seen, like I said earlier, a cut in the base rate of interest. So the cost of accessing credit will fall. We're seeing house prices already ticking up, which if you don't own a house isn't great, but that generally indicates optimism and confidence in the broader economy with regards to consumer demand. So you had this bizarre moment where these people go, oh my God, the world's falling apart. And actually, I wouldn't be that surprised if by the last quarter of this year, Britain's economic situation is the best it's looked in a really long time, possibly since 2016. So I agree with everything you've said, and I'd throw Twitter into the mix, Michael. These people are psyoping themselves.